Yeah, it's not coming out. The boot floor is well and truly seam sealed and under sealed in place. So, I should explain what's going on here. In the previous video we saw that I have rust along this edge. The side panels are a little scabby and there are a couple of holes right at the back. There's also a small rust hole back here and the side panel near it is scabby. Because of the way that the panels overlap and poor angle grinder access so close to the wheel well, it would be difficult for me to patch this area nicely in place. So the obvious answer is to escalate. Now I've got a problem to fix. Let's start here, tidying up the boot floor. I need to get the leftover edge of the side panels separated from the boot floor. Unfortunately, that means removing the cross beams as well. Yes. Because the side panels are sandwiched between the floor and the cross beams. Oh, this is going better than expected. Oh yeah. The next part might be a little over the top, but I stripped the whole panel back to metal. Anywhere near a weld or repair needed to be stripped anyway, and it's just nicer to be working with clean metal. Anyway, this is the back edge of the boot floor, where the other guy's repair panel was attached. It's rusty and full of holes. There's a few areas on the boot floor that need patching. So I made a bunch of patches. I am going to dress these welds, at least to the extent that they don't stand out below a coat of underseal. That's because in New Zealand, vehicles need to pass a warrant of fitness every 6 months. And these patches are completely fine in themselves, I could leave them. But I don't want to be having jolly conversations with the inspectors about how much work has been done on the car. Anyway, here's the end result. I did have to re-weld this line after I finished everything because I did a crap job welding it in the first place. But otherwise, it looks pretty good. And it's important that your boot floor looks pretty good. Now, back in the vehicle. What am I going to do about these side panels? Initially, I was just going to patch the bad parts. But given that I've cut the entire edge off both sides, it's lucky I have replacement panels. And because I have full replacement panels, I'm going to replace most of the side panel on both sides. I don't want to get into these corners though. To fully replace the entire panel, I think you'd want to remove the rear quarters, and I'm not interested in doing that. So I'm going to cut them into a line about here. Well, so this is a bit of a catch-up for me as well as you. So there hasn't been much progress on this project. Oh, and ignore the whole chassis thing underneath. I'm just using this other quick fixer-upper as a expensive table right now. So anyway, here's the boot floor. I think since you guys last saw it, I've just sprayed a quick layer of zinc over the top. I've cleaned up all of the original straps and things that go underneath. All 4 of those. And I think I mentioned before that I have purchased the full side panels as well. I also got a local place to fold up the transition piece for me. This is the part that holds the boot floor to the rest of the vehicle. It was completely rusted away. A small cover plate for the Crossmember. I'll show you that in a second, but basically somebody has replaced this in the past, but they just used a folded up piece of roof flashing or something, and lots of crappy welds all the way around. And also 2 body mounts. Now these aren't too bad on the vehicle, but somebody has patched the original ones up. They look okay, but while I'm here, these are really cheap, so I may as well replace them with new ones. I got these all from Paddock Spares, and they are actually made by this company here, DDS Metal Services. The panels themselves are excellent, and I suspect these are the same ones you get from all of the usual part suppliers in the UK. Let me show you the situation in the vehicle. So the hole has got a little bigger since you last saw it. I still have to tidy up the edges for welding, but otherwise this is the extent of what I'm removing. And down in here, this is one of the body mounts. It's just been patched up in here. It looks okay, but I'm just going to replace them anyway. Now the other piece, the cover I mentioned, is for this corner here. Just up in here, you can see somebody's used a piece of old fence or something. And it's kind of okay, but yeah, just a bit crappy. The welding's almost perfect as is. Also on the rear body cross member,
If I climb inside, we have some rust down here on the inside. So I need to cut this out and make a panel. Not a big deal, it's just a flat piece of sheet metal. I've gone as far as good metal down here, but I may have to remove a bit more from this end because this is a little crusty. I'll climb in and have a look in the hole. Well, the bottom looks really good. You'd normally expect the bottom surface to rust out more than the sides, but it hasn't. So this end is where it was still a little rusty, but I think it's fine. I can't feel anything further in. If I'd followed my line, it would probably be perfect. I might have to take a little bit more off here because I can feel some pitting right on the edge. Ooh. Didn't see that before. How am I going to fix that?
Well, that's a problem I don't want to deal with now. So let's replace the crappy end cover plate instead. This inside cover plate is always a separate part from the rest of the Crossmember. Unfortunately, the last guys kind of buggered up some of the surrounding Crossmember when they did their repair, so I'll have to patch that. There's also a rust hole here, which will be covered up solid anyway. I'll show you that in a second. And obviously this little guy, and a saw cut that needs welding up. The area around here is a bit pitted, but it feels solid, so we'll leave that alone. The other thing that's missing from this picture is a stiffener brace thing. This is all that remains of it. So I made a new one. So that's the driver's end of the rear crossmember repaired. The left hand side is pretty good, but I could feel through an access hole that the stiffener had rusted away at the end. So I quickly repaired that as well. So here's the rear crossmember situation. This side is done. I did have to make a small repair over here. And that's it for everything you can see on this side of the crossmember. Now, moving inside, I still have this huge hole to deal with. Now, I did make the repair panel for this already, but halfway through fitting it, I realized that the bottom panel of the rear crossmember is actually thicker steel than the rest. So this is no good. Now, the way I'm making this fold isn't very good. I realise that. I don't have a sheet metal folder, and something this long, 1.6mm thick, is way too stiff to fold with a piece of angle iron or whatever. 1.2 folds easily like sheet metal. 1.6 almost needs to be treated like plate. The problem is that doing it with a hammer like this is stretching the metal. And the end result of that is a swoop in the panel. Now, I didn't really think this was a big deal at the time. I put it across a couple of bits of wood and stood on it until it was about straight. Not perfect, but pretty good. Intending to refine it as necessary once it is welded in place. Okay, so that's that dealt with. Nope. Dealt with for now anyway. Now that the crossmember has some structure welded back into it, I'm going to cut my way into the nasty little rust holes under here. This is not ideal, cutting good steel out just for the sake of access, because every time you weld a panel into a bigger piece, you're pulling the metal around. But the alternative is lifting the body right off the chassis, which isn't an option on my driveway. Or the alternative is to replace the entire rear crossmember. And had I realised before I started that I was going to have to cut big sections out of the centre of this crossmember, I probably would have done that. But that's a big job in itself, because the outside body panels have to come off, and you need to make a temporary structure to hold the back of the vehicle together. But I think I would have done that in hindsight. Whatever. Here we are. Now I've got some warpage to deal with. The panel has pulled in slightly and caused a bow in the top. The mistake I made here was not identifying how significant this warpage was. The bit that's bowing up is actually pretty floppy right now. So I thought I'd weld it in and hope that all of these rigid corners would hold it straight. The truth is that I was a little confused as to how much of this bow was caused by me welding in panels, because there is a definite curve line where the seal has been hitting the door. So I didn't want to be chasing a problem that was pre-existing or just the way it is. So anyway, I finished everything up, and if I need to come back and fix this, I'll come back and fix it. The next thing I'm going to install is the inside lip of the boot edge. This is the piece that I had folded up locally. So this is a nice straight edge, and I'm definitely going to have to do something about the hump. It would be pretty easy to cut a slice through here to relieve the metal, but I've kind of welded the hump in place along its length as well. So I need to cut along the length of my existing weld, and I really want to cut right through the weld, not next to it. So I'm using phosphoric acid to show the existing weld line. I'm going to weld this inner lip in first. It's nice and straight, so I may as well get this in and make everything else line up with it. But here's where a new problem reared its ugly head. Remember this swoop? So right now I'm welding the inner lip to the top edge of this repair section. Now, I mostly straightened it out before I welded it in, but it's maybe a millimetre or two low in the centre. I intended to just bash it with a hammer until it was sitting hard up against the underside of the lip I'm welding in, because I don't want my nice straight folded inner lip to be pulled down.
Oh yeah, that's not going to work. No way. I'm not able to push this lower bit into line enough by hand or as I go. So I'm going to have to take this back off and make sure it's completely perfect before I start welding.
The problem I had was that the bottom of the crossmember and the repair panel is 1.6mm thick, and there was just no way I could bend it in place. I tried bashing it and squeezing it, but because the top edge isn't yet attached to anything, it was like trying to hit a trampoline. The steel is so thick, and without anything rigid to hit it against, I couldn't bend it even a millimeter. So once again, now, it's not like I have a better way of making this fold the second time. I did bash it down a bit more gently this time, but you can see this is what we're dealing with. Now, I need to weld to this flange, so the bend in this direction doesn't really matter, but if it's bent here, it's going to be dipping slightly along the flange as well. The reason this occurs is because the metal is stretched where I was hammering on it, so this edge is actually longer now than it was when it was a flat piece of metal. So we have to correct that. The tool that's designed for this exact purpose is a shrinker stretcher. I don't have one. The traditional way to shrink panel steel is with oxyacetylene, but I don't have any acetylene right now. Also, I don't know how well it would work close to the edge of thick steel anyway. So I'm going to use the welder, which will work better than trying to shrink it with a torch, but it will make a mess. So that weld is going to cool and contract inwards. Cooling the weld with a damp rag doesn't change anything, by the way. It just stops me burning my hand faster. Let's see. So we started with a gap across the straight edge of 9.2mm. So this isn't going to take much. We're already down to 3.4mm. And I didn't measure this last one, but it's probably about 1mm. So I made a couple more welds, which probably made it perfect, and then added 2 more just because I'm an idiot and overshot. Not a problem. A little bit of squishing the metal with a hammer stretched it back to perfect. If we clamp this to here, do we have room? Yep. The spot welds are all nice and flat with the panel underneath it, without putting any force on anything. So that's perfect. So that's the inside lip welded in place, at least along the bottom. Next I need to sort out this mess. You can see I've relieved the excess metal in here with the 2 cuts. So now I've got a bit too much metal in here because it's kind of wanting to squeeze together more. We're talking maybe 0.5mm of squeezing, so this isn't going to affect the thumb size panel gap around the door or anything. But it is making the metal pucker up. I don't have access to the back of the panel. That's what makes this difficult. I could possibly use a shrinking disc, but I'm just going to do what we did before and strategically shrink the metal with a welder. Given that I'm going to be putting on a big weld bead anyway, I don't think it matters if I grind a couple of extra little stripes.
Okay, that's all the welding on the rear cross member done. I'm going to turn the camera off and grind all of these welds away. I'll have to do the back of all of these plug welds as well, because that's where the door seal sits. Other than that, I'm sick of looking at this, and I'll turn you back on for the next job. Now, the next perilous task is to replace the body mounts. I'm not sure at this point if I'm going to do this or not. These body mounts, both sides, have been repaired before. Kind of okay-ish. I could just leave them and be careful to make sure they don't get any worse. The reason for my trepidation is that access is very poor through here. If I start to cut this out, I could be opening a major can of worms. If I can lift the body up, say another couple of inches, I think this will be pretty easy. I've loosened up the bolt. It's still in there, but it's loose. And let's see. It's getting a bit tight there. Is that going to be enough? I guess we'll give it a shot. What's the worst that can happen? I don't have a jack or anything high enough to reach the body. Otherwise, I would just do that. I seem to be lifting up the whole vehicle rather than just the body. Well, this is a good start. Okay, it's the following morning. Here's the plan. I don't seem to be able to lift this up enough to get the spacer out in the first place, or secondly to have any working room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the next lot of body mounts along, not remove the bolts because we're parked on a big hill and I don't want the body to shift, but I'll loosen the bolts, or the nuts, and hopefully that gives us a little bit more flex. Okay, that's about enough. Now same on the other side. Okay, it's not too bad. I'm pretty sure I can get that out if I can try. Okay, looks like we're doing this. I'm not sure this is a good idea, but I did it anyway. This doesn't feel very solid. Yep. Now I've got to get in there and clean up all of this mess. There's two spot welded flanges that I need to grind off somehow. Okay, all cleaned up. Wasn't too bad. If you're lifting the body only as much as I am, you are going to need something smaller than an angle grinder to get in there. This worked fine for me. Alright, I suppose we should weld this in. Let me get set up. Okay, I've got it clamped in place. I'm a little concerned that this replacement body mount isn't quite sitting in the right place. It seems to be further back than the original one. I think I've got it pretty much lined up this way, but I'm going to tack one of the holes on the back and then lower it down just to make sure we can actually get the bolt through. Let's see. Not looking good. Okay, minor fail.
Good enough.
Alright, so that's the rear crossmember done. The next job is to fit the side panels. But first I need to clean up all of the edges where they're going to be welded in. So now I need to cut this to shape, which is a bit tricky because I kind of need to cut it to shape before I can see how I need to cut it to shape. At the moment I've got a huge gap because I can't push it anywhere near far enough back. So I'm just going to start hacking and hopefully don't go too far. Okay, not too bad. Alright, well I'll make a few more marks and get it a little closer. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I still have plenty of margin to refine it, but before I do that I'm going to do the other side, and then I'll check everything with the floor panel in place. Perfect. Basically done. All right. Oh, we're popped out a little bit over there. But you can see that the floor panel is sitting within the edges of the side panels. So I'm going to mark that fairly carefully, and then it's just a matter of refining the edges.
You can see here I had to modify the edge of this panel. In the vehicle the last bit of this flange tapers up. That wasn't built into the replacement panel as it came. Also, I'm scuffing the paint that isn't being removed. I'm not going to strip these panels back to bare metal, so the black paint that's on them is going to stay, and it needs keying for the subsequent layers. And all the bare metal edges now get hit with a coat of zinc weld-through primer.
Okay, what do you reckon? I reckon let's do this side first. Why not? I've still got my mark down here. Make sure we're lined up exactly. There we go. Clean out the primer. Okay, here we go. First plug weld. Second attempt. Okay. One side held in place. Now, I'm obviously going to tack the other side in before I fully weld everything. All right. Is that a milestone? Kind of.
I did grind the top of these straight welds down. I don't know why. It's a little lumpy through the weld, which would be very satisfying to hammer out. But to do that I'd have to grind the underside of the weld flush as well, and that would be going over the top for the sake of a boot floor panel, which I've already gone over the top with. Alright, so you might look at this and think, just weld the boot floor in and then it's done. No! I will never have access to the chassis like this again. So, of course I'm going to clean all of this up. Now that the chassis has been fully restored with black spray paint, you'd think it's time to put the boot floor in. But not yet, because I have to deal with these painful little clip bracket things. They hold a piece of plastic trim in across the boot threshold. This is the only original one, and I have to drill a bunch of square holes, but I struggle to find a square drill bit the right size, so I'm going to have to make them the slow way. The hole needs to be 7mm square. Annoyingly, I don't have anything that's 7mm thick, so I had to grind down a piece of 10mm stock. And I overshot, that's what the shims are for. I think you can see where this is going. I could have done this a more fancy way, like make a brooch, or maybe even cut the square corners on the shaper, but that would have taken at least a day to set up. And yeah, a file is manual labour, and I'm kind of allergic to manual labour, but it didn't really take that long. Now, the hard part is folding them without a sheet metal folder, or spending ages setting something up. But by the time I got to the last one, I'd figured out a method that worked okay. Now it's finally time to weld the boot floor in. No, not quite. Well, kind of. I need to drill a few more holes in the repaired section of our boot floor, specifically for this, so we can access this threaded hole, just the same as this one here. The rest of these are for spot welds, so they can be anywhere. Now the cross braces, or floor beams, I don't know what they're called, are the lowest part of the sandwich, so the holes have to be transferred through the new side panels as well. Okay, let's stop dicking around and get this floor welded in, starting with the two cross braces that sit on these rubber pads. And this is where I ran into a little bit of a problem. The side you can see jams in pretty well. These sit on a wedge shape. The closer I bring it towards the camera, the closer the cross brace gets to the pad on the chassis. I can see where these braces used to sit, because I transferred the spot weld holes from the floor panel into the new side panels, and I can also see the drill marks on the cross brace itself. The problem is that when it's about where it needs to be, there is a gap on the right hand side, about 6mm. So if I weld it in now, the floor structure won't be sitting on the chassis, it'll be suspended. I don't know if that is a problem or not. With the weight of the seats and everything else in place, that gap might close up, especially once the vehicle bounces around a bit. But I do not want to risk a situation where the boot floor resonates. And you can see the other cross braces are the same. There's about a 6mm gap on both sides. So I did the obvious thing and bashed stuff with the hammer. Now I do remember that the original side panels were not nice and flat alongside the wheel wells like the replacements are. So I think that's all that's going on. And bashing everything with a hammer did get me to about where I needed to be. And then I realized I'm a total Yep, I forgot to take this block of wood out. In actual fact, this didn't make much of a difference, but removing the block of wood did get me the last millimetre or two that I needed. And now, double checking that everything fits. And it's time to weld the floor in. No, not quite. One more thing. These wire holding straps need welding back on the underside of the floor. And these seatbelt brackets are riveted to the underside of the floor. The rivets just hold them until the seat bolts are installed. One more thing, I need to drill holes along this edge for plug welding. And I just did that off camera because, well, I don't want to get metal shavings all over the place here, and I couldn't be bothered moving you guys.
Okay, is it really time? Have I missed anything? Probably. So the floor is happening right now. I don't really have a plan for how I'm going to weld these floppy cross braces to the underside of the floor. I think this one at the back is sort of pushing upwards anyway, so I'll do that first. And this one I might be able to reach through the hole for the fuel pump access. Otherwise I'll have to jam bits of wood up or something like that. Bye bye, back of chassis.
I thought I'd better start with a couple of easy to remove tacks. And everything looked fine, so let's proceed with 100 plug welds.
Try again.
I had problems. You can see the little exploding balls of steel shooting off. So first of all, I do remove the weld through primer with a wire brush on a drill. But that can't get to the primer in between the two panels. And the whole point of weld through primer is to have primer in between the panels anyway. And unlike the rest of the welding you've seen, the primer was pretty thick on both the underside of the floor and the top of the cross bracing, because it is the long-term coat of paint that'll only have underseal over it. and the zinc was degassing out from between the panels like little geysers through my welding. I'm already welding pretty hot to overcome the primer, and I don't want to turn the welder up more because I don't want the weld to sag through the bottom of the panel. So at this point, I was getting angry and frustrated. So I did what we'd all do and pushed on regardless, getting more and more angry. Until finally it got late and I had to stop. The next morning, the birds were chirping, the sun was out, I turned the welder up one more notch, and everything was easy. No, still kind of but more tolerable. And that's it. Now I must admit, this boot floor was a bit of a journey, and the Discovery is verging on becoming a project. And the floor isn't finished yet, there's still seam sealing, under seal and refitting the petrol tank and other bits and pieces. But this is already the longest video I've ever made. Sorry about that. So this video stops here. Well, I guess we have time for a little bit of black spray paint. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.